Imagine living your entire life underground. No sky, no open horizon, no idea what the outside world really looks like. And then, one day, you hear a voice coming through the radio, a voice that should not exist. That is the terrifying possibility hanging over Silo Season 3, Episode 7, Radio. After everything Juliette Nichols has survived, she finally begins to understand what she has to do. But there is a problem. The people controlling the silos may already know what she is planning. And if they do, Juliette may be walking directly into a trap. Season 3 has been building toward this moment through two completely different timelines. One takes place in the present, where Juliette is fighting to protect the people still trapped inside the silos. The other takes us back to the before times, when Helen Drew and Daniel Keene are slowly uncovering the truth about how this nightmare began. At first, these stories seem separated by generations, but the closer we get to radio, the more obvious it becomes that they are connected. And the connection may be hidden in something as simple as a transmission. Let's start with Juliette. After surviving her forced cleaning and returning to Silo 18, Juliette is not the same person she was before. She has memories missing. Some of those memories were deliberately suppressed, but now they are coming back, and every memory gives her another piece of the puzzle. She remembers what happened outside. She remembers Silo 17. She remembers Solo. And most importantly, she begins to understand that simply surviving is no longer enough. Juliette needs a plan. Her attention turns towards Silo 17, where Solo and the surviving children are still fighting to survive. Their situation is extremely fragile. Resources are limited, trust is limited, and every mistake could cost someone their life. But Juliette isn't thinking only about rescuing them. She has discovered something much bigger. There may be an outflow vent connected to the system controlling Silo 18. If Juliette can locate it and somehow interfere with that system, she could potentially change the balance of power inside the silo. That means her mission could affect thousands of people. But there is no way Juliette can simply walk back into Silo 17 with consequences, so she makes a difficult decision. She sends Lukas Kyle and Patrick Kennedy instead. And this is where the story becomes much more dangerous, because Lukas isn't just another person inside the silo. He understands the systems, he understands the history, and he has already been pulled deeper into the mystery surrounding the silos. Patrick, meanwhile, brings another set of skills and motivations into the mission. Together, they are being sent toward a place where the rules are no longer clear, and Juliette knows that. She knows Silo 17 is dangerous, she knows the people there are vulnerable, and she knows the system controlling Silo 18 may be watching. But what happens next changes everything, because while Juliette prepares her move, another crisis is exploding inside Silo 18. Camille Sims is reaching her breaking point. For much of the season, Camille has been caught between loyalty, fear, and the growing realization that her husband Robert Sims is hiding something. But now patience is running out. Camille confronts Robert, and she threatens him. She wants the truth. Not another explanation, not another excuse. The truth. And Robert is now trapped between protecting himself and protecting the secrets of the system. This is important because the Sims family has always been connected to power. Robert knows things that ordinary residents do not. He understands how the silo operates. He understands what happens when people ask the wrong questions. And Camille is getting dangerously close to asking those questions. Then we come back to the title, Radio. Why radio? Why now? Throughout the silo story, communication has never been just communication. Information is power. Whoever controls the information controls what people believe. Inside the silos, radio channels are separated and monitored. Silo 1 sits at the center of that network. It can monitor communications across the underground system. So if Juliette starts using radio communication to coordinate her mission, she may also be revealing her position. She may think she is sending a message, but someone else could be listening. And that creates the central mystery of Episode 7. Is Juliette trying to contact someone, or is someone trying to contact her? Because there is a huge difference. And if a signal from somewhere unexpected reaches the silo, the consequences could be enormous. But the radio mystery becomes even more interesting when we look at the before times, because Daniel Keene has already encountered a clue involving radio communication. Earlier in the season, Daniel tracks down the father of a pilot who disappeared alongside Charlotte's squadron. And during that investigation, he learns something disturbing. Someone may have recorded the squadron's final radio communications. Think about that for a moment. A lost squadron, a mysterious disappearance, a recording of their final moments, and now an episode called Radio. That is almost certainly not an accidental connection. The question is what the recording contains. Could it reveal what happened to the pilots? Could it expose the conspiracy Daniel and Helen are investigating? Or could it contain something much bigger? Something connected to the creation of the silos themselves? And that is where the two timelines begin moving towards each other. Juliette is trying to uncover the truth from inside the silos. Daniel and Helen are trying to uncover the truth from before the silos existed. Two investigations, two different centuries, but possibly one mystery. And nobody knows what will happen when those two stories finally connect. Because the truth about the silos may not have started underground. It may have started with a message, a warning, a transmission, a voice, and someone decided that the world was never supposed to hear it. Now the situation becomes even more dangerous. Juliette has recovered enough of her memory to understand that waiting is no longer an option. She has spent too much time trying to understand what happened to her. Now she has to act. But Juliette also knows something most people inside Silo 18 don't. The system isn't simply a machine. It is an entire structure of control, rules, surveillance, communication, fear, and information. Every part of life inside the silo is connected. That is why the outflow system matters so much. If Juliette can interfere with it, she could potentially disrupt something much larger than a single mechanical system. But getting there is another matter. And that's why Lukas and Patrick are sent towards Silo 17. At first, the mission sounds straightforward. Find the location, reach the system, gather the information, then report back. But nothing in Silo is ever that simple, especially when the people in charge may already know the mission is happening. This is where the title radio becomes even more suspicious. Imagine Lukas and Patrick moving through the silo. They don't know who might be watching. They don't know which communications are secure. And they don't know whether the instructions they receive are actually coming from Juliette. One wrong message could send them in the wrong direction. One false instruction could put them directly into danger. And if Silo 1 is monitoring the frequencies, every transmission could become evidence. That means silence may actually be safer than communication. But Juliette needs information, and information requires communication. It's a perfect trap. The more she communicates, the more visible she becomes. The less she communicates, the more vulnerable her people become. Meanwhile, Silo 17 remains a ticking clock. Solo and the children have survived situations that should have killed them, but survival doesn't mean safety. They are still isolated, still surrounded by secrets, and still dependent on systems they don't fully understand. Juliette knows this. She also knows that Silo 17 may contain information that could change everything about Silo 18. That is why she cannot simply abandon it. But there is another reason she needs Lukas and Patrick to go. Juliette herself is now too important. If she disappears again, Silo 18 could collapse into chaos. She needs someone else to move while she remains close enough to protect the people behind her. And that creates a dangerous chess game. Juliette makes one move. The system responds. Lukas and Patrick make another. Camille confronts Robert. And somewhere in the background, people are listening. Then there is Camille. Her confrontation with Robert may seem like a separate storyline. It isn't. Camille represents something Juliette desperately needs, a person inside the system who is beginning to question the system itself. Robert has spent much of his life understanding how power works. He knows when to obey, he knows when to threaten, he knows when to hide. But Camille is no longer willing to play by those roles. She wants answers. And when someone who knows the system begins asking questions, the system becomes vulnerable. That's why Camille's threat to Robert could be more important than it appears. If Robert finally tells her what he knows, she could become a major source of information. But if Robert refuses, Camille may take matters into her own hands, and that could create a completely different kind of rebellion. Not a rebellion built around weapons, a rebellion built around information. Because that is what Silo has always understood better than almost anything else. The most dangerous thing you can give people is not a weapon, it is the truth. Now let's return to the before times. Daniel, Keene, and Helen Drew are getting closer to the origin of the conspiracy. Their investigation has shown that the silos weren't simply created as a random solution to some unknown catastrophe. There was a plan. There were decisions. There were people involved. And those people knew exactly what they were building. The question is why? Why create an underground civilization? Why separate people into isolated communities? Why control their memories? Why monitor communication? And why make sure that almost nobody knows the full truth? The answer may be buried inside the events surrounding the lost pilots. If those final radio communications were really recorded, they could provide a piece of evidence that survived for decades, maybe even centuries. And now the present-day story is approaching the same mystery from the opposite direction. Juliette is trying to uncover the truth from inside the silos. Daniel and Helen are trying to uncover the truth from before the silos existed. 2 investigations, 2 different centuries, but possibly one mystery. And nobody knows what will happen when those 2 stories finally connect. Because the truth about the silos may not have started underground. It may have started with a message, a warning, a transmission, a voice. And someone decided that the world was never supposed to hear it. Now the situation becomes even more dangerous. Juliette has recovered enough of her memory to understand that waiting is no longer an option. She has spent too much time trying to understand what happened to her. Now she has to act. But Juliette also knows something most people inside Silo 18 don't. The system isn't simply a machine. It is an entire structure of control, rules, surveillance, communication, fear, and information. Every part of life inside the silo is connected. That is why the outflow system matters so much. If Juliette can interfere with it, she could potentially disrupt something much larger than a single mechanical system. But getting there is another matter. And that's why Lukas and Patrick are sent towards Silo 17. At first, the mission sounds straightforward. Find the location, reach the system, gather the information, then report back. But nothing in Silo is ever that simple, especially when the people in charge may already know the mission is happening. This is where the title radio becomes even more suspicious. Imagine Lukas and Patrick moving through the silo. They don't know who might be watching. They don't know which communications are secure. And they don't know whether the instructions they receive are actually coming from Juliette. One wrong message could send them in the wrong direction. One false instruction could put them directly into danger. And if Silo 1 is monitoring the frequencies, every transmission could become evidence. That means silence may actually be safer than communication. But Juliette needs information, and information requires communication. It's a perfect trap. The more she communicates, the more visible she becomes. The less she communicates, the more vulnerable her people become. Meanwhile, Silo 17 remains a ticking clock. Solo and the children have survived situations that should have killed them. But survival doesn't mean safety. They are still isolated, still surrounded by secrets, and still dependent on systems they don't fully understand. Juliette knows this. She also knows that Silo 17 may contain information that could change everything about Silo 18. That is why she cannot simply abandon it. But there is another reason she needs Lukas and Patrick to go. Juliette herself is now too important. If she disappears again, Silo 18 could collapse into chaos. She needs someone else to move while she remains close enough to protect the people behind her. And that creates a dangerous chess game. Juliette makes one move. The system responds. Lukas and Patrick make another. Camille confronts Robert. And somewhere in the background, people are listening.
By this point, the biggest mystery isn't simply what Juliette is planning. It's whether the system already knows. Because Juliette has one major advantage. She understands that the Silo's greatest weapon is secrecy. But she also has one major weakness. She has started remembering. And the more she remembers, the harder she becomes to control. This is exactly why her memories matter. They are not just pieces of her personal history. They are evidence. Evidence that could expose how the Silo works. Evidence that could explain what happened outside. Evidence that could reveal why certain people were chosen to know the truth, while everyone else was kept in the dark. That is why suppressing Juliette's memories was so important. A person without memories can be controlled. A person who remembers can ask questions. And a person who asks questions can inspire everyone else to ask them too. Now imagine that Juliette manages to establish a radio link with someone connected to Silo 17. Suddenly, the walls between the silos become less important. People can communicate, information can move, and once information starts moving, control becomes much harder. This is why the radio could be more dangerous than any physical weapon. It could connect people who were deliberately kept apart. But there is another possibility. What if the radio isn't simply a way to communicate between Juliette and Silo 17? What if it connects to something outside their known network? Something nobody in Silo 18 is supposed to hear? That would completely change the story, because the people inside the silos have spent generations believing they understand the limits of their world. They know the rules, they know the dangers, they know what they have been told about the outside. But what if those rules were never the complete truth? This is where the Before Time storyline becomes crucial. Helen and Daniel are discovering what happened before the silos became prisons, and every answer creates another question. Their investigation suggests that the world before the silos was already moving toward disaster, but the existence of the silos means someone prepared for that disaster. Someone planned for humanity to survive underground, and that raises a disturbing possibility. Maybe the silo system wasn't designed only to protect people. Maybe it was designed to control them. Think about the structure. Separate communities, strict rules, limited information, restricted movement, constant monitoring, and powerful authorities deciding what ordinary people are allowed to know. That isn't simply survival. That's social engineering. And if the Before Time storyline eventually reveals who designed that system, the consequences for Juliette could be enormous. Because Juliette isn't fighting against one bad person, she is fighting against an entire structure that has existed for generations, and now the structure is beginning to crack. Camille's confrontation with Robert is one crack. Juliette's recovered memories are another. Lukas and Patrick moving towards Silo 17 create another. And the radio could become the biggest crack of all. Because once communication becomes possible, secrets become much harder to contain. Now let's consider the danger facing Lukas and Patrick. They are entering a mission connected to the same mystery Juliette is trying to solve. But the available story information suggests that the system may have its own plans for them. That changes everything. They aren't simply exploring. They may be walking into an operation that has been anticipated. Imagine Juliette waiting for a transmission. Nothing. Then suddenly, the radio comes alive. A message arrives. But how does she know it's really Lukas? How does she know the message wasn't intercepted? How does she know the person speaking is still in control? That uncertainty could become one of the episode's biggest sources of tension. And in a world where information is controlled, even a familiar voice may not be trustworthy. Meanwhile, Camille's confrontation with Robert could push another secret into the open. If Robert finally admits what he knows, Camille could learn that the people running the silo have been manipulating events for much longer than she realized. But if he refuses, she may decide that waiting for permission is pointless, and that could lead to consequences nobody expects.
Because once people inside the silo stop believing their leaders, authority begins to collapse. The rebellion already showed what happens when people stop obeying. But this time the rebellion may be different. It may spread through information instead of violence. A whispered message, a hidden recording, a forbidden frequency, a voice coming through the static. And suddenly thousands of people could begin asking the same question. What else have they been hiding from us? That question is dangerous, because once you ask it, you can never go back. And this is where Juliette's story may collide with Daniel and Helen's. Daniel is investigating the original conspiracy. Juliette is fighting its consequences. The past is explaining the present, and the present is beginning to challenge the past. But there is still one final piece missing. The recording, the radio, the message. What exactly happened during those final moments of the lost squadron? If that recording exists, it could reveal a secret that the people behind the silos have spent generations trying to bury. And if Juliette somehow gets access to information from that same mystery, then the entire story changes. Because the past would no longer be history, it would become a weapon. And now we reach the most important question. What could the ending of radio ultimately mean? Without inventing unconfirmed scenes, the strongest way to understand the episode is to look at what the season has been building toward. Juliette is no longer simply trying to survive. She is trying to understand the system. She has recovered enough of her memories to realize that the answers are connected. Silo 17, Silo 18, the outflow system, the surveillance network, the suppressed memories, and the mysterious events from the before times. These aren't separate mysteries anymore. They are pieces of one enormous puzzle. And radio could be the episode where those pieces finally begin fitting together. The title itself suggests that communication will be central. But communication is never safe in the world of Silo. Every message leaves a trace. Every transmission can be monitored. Every voice can reveal a location. And every secret that travels through the radio could potentially fall into the wrong hands. That is why Juliette's decision to rely on Lukas and Patrick is so dangerous. She has to trust other people. And trust has always been difficult in the silos. Juliette may have spent years fighting alone, but she cannot solve this mystery alone. She needs Lukas. She needs the people of Silo 17. She needs information. And she may eventually need Camille. Because the final battle may not be about escaping the silo. It may be about breaking the system that keeps everyone trapped. Now think about Camille. Her confrontation with Robert could be the beginning of a major shift. Robert represents the old structure. Camille represents someone who has lived inside that structure and is finally refusing to accept it. If Robert reveals the truth, Camille gains knowledge. If he refuses, she gains motivation. Either way, the balance between them changes, and that could have consequences far beyond their marriage. Then there is Lukas. His mission could place him directly between Juliette's plan and the system's response. If the system is truly anticipating their movements, Lukas and Patrick may discover that someone has already been there before them. They could find evidence, a hidden mechanism, a message, or perhaps something that proves the silo network is even more connected than they believed. And if that happens, Juliette may finally understand what the system has been protecting all along. But the most interesting possibility involves the radio itself. What if the voice on the other end isn't Solo? What if it isn't Lukas? What if it isn't anyone Juliette expects? Imagine the episode ending with a transmission. Static. Silence. Then a voice. A voice that should be impossible. Maybe it comes from another silo. Maybe it comes from somewhere outside the known network. Or maybe it is an old recording that suddenly becomes relevant again. The identity of that voice could become one of the season's biggest mysteries. And that is exactly the kind of ending Silo thrives on. Not an answer. A revelation that creates an even bigger question. Because the show has never been about simply discovering that a secret exists. It is about discovering that the secret you found is connected to something much larger. The before time story could eventually explain why the silos were built. Juliette's story could reveal how that system survived. And the radio could provide the bridge between the two. That would make the title incredibly meaningful. A radio signal travels across distance, a recording travels across time, and a secret can survive both. So when we look at radio, we shouldn't think only about someone speaking into a microphone. We should think about information. Who sends it? Who receives it? Who is listening? And who desperately wants that message to disappear? Because somewhere in the silence between those questions may be the truth about the silos. And there is one final thought worth keeping in mind. Juliette began this story as someone who simply wanted to understand what happened outside. Now she is becoming something much more dangerous to the people controlling the silos. She is becoming someone who can connect the pieces. She remembers. She investigates. She communicates. And most importantly, she refuses to accept the answers she is given. That is why the system has so much to fear. Not because Juliette is the strongest person in the silo, but because she is willing to keep asking questions. And once enough people start asking the same questions, even the strongest system can begin to collapse. So the real mystery of radio may not be who is speaking. It may be who has been listening all along. And if that final voice turns out to connect the present-day silo mystery with the events Daniel and Helen uncovered in the before times, then Season 3 could be heading toward one of its biggest revelations yet. The silos were built to keep humanity alive, but perhaps they were also built to keep something else hidden. Something so dangerous that even generations later, people are still being controlled to protect it. And if Juliette finally discovers what that secret is, the question won't be whether she can survive. The question will be, can the silo survive the truth?